Greetings, everybody. Welcome to the Roosevelt House Public Policy Institute. I am Basil Smikle, Director of the Public Policy Program here. Welcome to another public policy mixtape podcast. I am delighted to have Assembly Member Amanda Septimo with us from the Bronx, the 84th Assembly District. You can welcome her.
Thank you. Thank you.
We're so excited to welcome her here. I want to get into sort of her origin story. And every superhero needs an origin story, right? So there's an origin story, and talk a bit about what concerns she has for her district, but also the borough and the city. There's going to be an opportunity for all of you to ask questions, so feel free to do so. She said nothing's off limits, so
I meant it.
nothing's off limits. And so I just want to start and get right into it. So where are you from? Grew up in the Bronx?
Yes, I'm originally from Hunts Point in the Bronx, actually, which is the rougher side of the mountain, but it gets a rougher reputation than it deserves. I think it's a fantastic place that I love.
And it's undergoing a lot of, I don't say renovation, but there's a lot of construction, a lot of development there right now, right?
There is, and we're also home to the produce market, the meat market, and the fish market, which together are the largest food distribution center in the entire world, which I think is remarkable. Any food on the East Coast is probably coming through one of our markets.
Through Hunts Point?
Yeah.
Wow. And so what was it like growing up there, when you were growing up there? We won't talk about how old you are, we won't date you.
I'm 31 and I'm happy to say that.
Okay, all right,
Yes.
all right. So
It only
at your
goes-
time, in that decade, what was it like growing up in Hunts Point?
I think Hunts Point is a lot like the other parts of the Bronx in that it's always felt like the story of the Bronx was really different than the story that everyone else knows of it. So I feel like I know that I grew up in a community full of love, full of support, full of opportunity, full of people loving one another, full of neighbors saying, hey kids, stop doing that thing, I'm gonna tell your mom, right? That sense of community. But when you hear the story of the Bronx sort of from a public perspective, it's this story of like despair, this story of, communities that are stuck. And I think to a certain extent that's true when you look at the policies and the decisions that have been made that have gotten Hunts Point to a place where it is part of the poorest congressional district in the country. It does have the highest asthma rate in the nation because of the markets, because of the highways. But so I think growing up, it was kind of this dichotomy happening all the time, right? You're hearing this one thing, it's not matching what you're living every day. But I was also kind of noticing that Hunts Point was different than other parts of the city, right? You can feel the difference when you're in Hunts Point versus the Upper East Side. And that's a reality that you just couldn't run away from.
And no, clearly these issues, these differences made an impression on you as a teenager.
Yeah.
And you got pretty active as a teen.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Yeah. So, it's so funny. I started kind of in this world with this organization called the Point CDC that does a lot.
I know the Point. So
They're fantastic.
Maria Torres?
Yes.
We went to college together.
Wow.
So, yeah, oh my gosh. She's fantastic.
She's amazing.
Yeah.
And a Mets fan, which I love. So I got oriented in this world of like social justice, social activism, environmental justice through the Point, which is amazing in that I think it really, at a young age, helped me understand that when you bring an equity lens to everything, that's really how you make progress. And what does equity actually mean, right? It's not necessarily giving everyone the same, it's giving everyone what they need. And that's something that really happened at the Point, and I'm really grateful for. But it's also something that I think frustrates you. The moment you start to understand that, you start to really pay attention to policy and really notice how, okay, we could fix some of these things pretty easily. You've just got to have the willpower and the commitment.
And you volunteered there as a teen?
I was in their teen activist program called Action, which stands for Activists Coming to Inform Our Neighborhood, and we did get a little stipend. My little $75 every 2 weeks I was very proud of. And it got me to the movies and all those kinds of things.
You didn't have to get working papers. Remember working papers? Did you? Working papers? Did you? Is that yes?
You know what's so funny? This is hilarious that you say this. So the reason I ended up at the Point, I was volunteering at this parks recreation center that had opened up the street from my house, and because my parents wouldn't let me play outside and do kinds of, I had to be somewhere, right? Like you couldn't just be outside in the street. I had to be somewhere. So I was volunteering at this place. And I spent a summer kind of doing that. And I was coming home from school one day, and I popped in to say hi to some of my friends. And on the bulletin board, it said, "Job for teens, no working papers needed, call here." And I ripped off. I was like, no working papers, teens, money, that sounds like me. And that's how I ended up at the point.
For those that don't know, working papers, you have to go to Arthur Avenue, I think, to get,
Up by Fordham, yep.
right, to get like your official, I'm old school, to get like official paperwork to be able to work by a certain age, so on
Yeah.
and so forth.
It's like a little green paper. It's very stressful,
It
honestly.
is incredibly stressful.
Very
So,
stressful.
right, so no working papers needed was a blessing.
Exactly.
So, did you do other work as a teen around that time in whether it's the Point or other organizations?
Yeah, so I was doing Action 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then I was also interning with Congressman Serrano's office,
Yeah.
who was my local congressman at the time. And that was really cool because, you know, the Point does work in the South Bronx, and the congressman represents the South Bronx. So I'd be at meetings where the work was kind of intersecting, where I'd see the staff person that I was working with at the office, or I'd see my Action friends and be like, "Hey guys." And so again, I think it was a really unique opportunity to understand what it means to think about equity and how it connects to policy. And I really got lucky to be able to do both those things at the same time.
Did it mean a lot to you to sort of be at home doing this? Like did you feel like you're doing this for your home, to make your home better?
You know, I want to say that I was that wise at 16, but it just wasn't, right? At 16, I think I just was starting to appreciate what injustice meant. I also went to all that time, from 5th grade to 12th grade, I went to a small private school in Westchester, where tuition is $50,000 a year. And so I also was kind of living with that dichotomy. And what I was really sinking into was, okay, there's a lot of things that are just unfair about the circumstances that I'm in every day and that other people find themselves in every day. And so it felt nice to be kind of seeing that that was not something that we were making up as people in the Bronx, right? That it really was real, and that you could change it, to be empowered to feel like you could change it. One of my proudest moments to date, which is probably sad, maybe I peaked too early, but happened when I was around 16. We beat a jail in Hunts Point. We'd had 7 jails at the time. Mayor Bloomberg wanted to put another. And after a whole long campaign, we were able to beat that. And so that was really just empowering.
Is
And
Spofford in your district?
it is, but it was, because it's not
right,
anymore. But yes,
right.
yes. And I grew up actually literally down the block from Spofford.
If I remember, a lot of my friends, they talked about Spofford
Yeah.
a lot. Is it juvenile?
Yep,
detention
it's
center?
like the bad place, the
It
boogeyman
was-
for sure.
That was a tough spot.
Yeah.
And a lot of people that I grew up with were kind of in and out of Spofford
Yeah.
quite frequently.
Yeah.
That was it. Yeah, that was a tough time.
But now it's been, by the way, Spofford totally decommissioned, closed, recently knocked down, and now is being replaced with like 3,000 units of housing
Wow.
that are deeply, deeply affordable. The Point CDC is part of the development team and pushed to make sure that it's not like the fake brand of affordable that we see sometimes, but like really affordable to people who live there right now. And I'm so proud of it, and every time I get there, I'm almost moved to tears because of how special it is.
Now, fast forward a little bit, you received this really prestigious Posse scholarship.
I did.
Right? What's tell us about that scholarship?
Yeah,
and-
so Posse, has anybody ever heard of Posse? It's, okay, great. It's the concept was born in 1989 with Vanderbilt, actually. The founder was working with a bunch of inner city students and was sending them off to these great colleges and finding that like in the first semester, they just weren't getting through. So, and she said she was having a conversation with one of the students, which this is really a sign of the times, where he was like, I would have never dropped out if I had my Posse with me. And I don't know that anybody would say that today, but the concept remains, right? That like you need a support system when you go to college, and it just makes it easier for you to be successful when you have one. And that's the premise of Posse. It sends kids from the city to these schools in groups. We spend about a year working together in your senior year, getting to know each other and really being that support. And some of my best friends from college were from my Posse.
And you went to Vanderbilt.
I did.
And where is that?
Down in Nashville, Tennessee.
What
which
is it?
pretty different from the Bronx.
Yeah. I was about to say. So Bronx private school, Westchester, Nashville, Tennessee. What was that like?
Yeah. It was a culture shock, to be honest. I had never thought that I would be a full 2-hour plane ride away from home. So being that far away from home was difficult. I, oddly enough, have an aunt who lives in Tennessee because she went down for school at some point, met her husband, and just never came back. So that made it a little easier to be able to, when I just needed cooked food or someone who loved me, if I got a bad grade or something, I would just go visit my aunt. But it was so different that it really confirmed for me that I'm a New Yorker. And I was really grateful for the experience for that. It was an amazing 4 years, and I feel like I really got to experience the South. Nashville is not like so geographically deep South, but it's
Right.
got like a really deep South feeling. And I'm grateful for it, but I'm happy to be back in the Bronx.
Your family's Dominican.
Yes, my mother's
Not-
family's Dominican, my father's family's Black, actually.
Not a lot of Dominican food in Nashville, you're saying?
None. And it's, I've got to tell you, it's interesting because there weren't, now the Latino community in Nashville is a little more diverse, but it's mostly a Mexican community down there. And most people who kind of look like me, if you're down south, they assume you're black and white. So people would routinely think I was black and white. And then the moment they heard me speak Spanish, they're like, I didn't know you were Mexican. And I'm just like, well, I'm not, actually. There are other people out there that are not, but it was,
Right.
a cultural exchange, we'll call it.
So come back to, so you're back, so you confirm that you're a New Yorker, you come back to New York, and how do you take all of those experiences? What do you dig right into afterwards?
So this is the fun part. I was just about to finish school, actually, the semester left, and there was an opening at the congressman's office.
Wow.
And jobs in Congress, they just don't wait for you, right? I couldn't feel like, guys, give me 4 months, let me get this degree, I'll be right back, I promise. Though this was the same congressman that I interned for in high school, and so it really felt like a big opportunity. So big that I left.
Okay.
And I left school to go take it. And my parents were like, have you lost your mind, right? But I had to be like, Mom, just trust me, we're gonna go with this. And I was like, I'll go right back, don't worry. It wasn't until like 2 years ago that I actually just finished the last semester because I needed to make my mom happy. But it was incredible to be able to have gone away to school. And I think in college you do a lot of theorizing about the world, especially in politics. You're reading Voltaire, you're reading Hobbes, you're reading the Federalist Papers, like what's the point of this union, what's the point of this country. I was a political science major, so I did a lot of that kind of reading.
How many political science majors have you done?
Love that. So fun, right? This great American experiment. And so it was really nice to kind of take all of that and then get into the real world of it all. And again, just be back home. That's when I started to appreciate, like, it's a privilege to do this work at home.
What's it like then working for a politician? And I always think about this with students in my classes and such, did what you were learning in school in any way match with that real world experience, particularly with somebody like Jose Serrano?
I was extremely lucky to be able to learn from somebody like Congressman Serrano, who is principled in a way that almost doesn't feel real, and just sets such a high standard in that it makes you believe that some of the things the founding fathers were absolutely flawed, but I really believe in a lot of the things that they talk about in terms of like the spirit of the union, the point of this experiment that we're all in together. Congressman Serrano is the kind of public servant that makes you believe that it's true, that like there are people out there and we can build this place if we're all committed to it. But I think all of that said, not everybody is the congressman, right? And so when you get into it, it's like, oh, okay, I guess this is a little more like House of Cards than I thought. But
House of Cards, like really?
yeah, minus the murder, minus the murder. Just trying to qualify that. No people dying, but I think there is a lot more. When you leave the theoretical realm, you get to see that it's people. It's people that you're dealing with, just like any other industry in place, and those are some of the things that stand in the way, I think, of progress sometimes.
It's interesting as you talk about this, because I do think that sometimes you have students that say, "Well, I did all of this in school, but I don't know if I really needed it in the when you get out to the real world," and you try to say, "No, there's a way that you can make all of that relevant."
100%, and I think for me it serves as a really important sort of home base and grounding. I literally just said to one of my closest friends recently, I was like, I think I need to go back and read the Federalist Papers, because I need to just go back to Like, what's the point of all this? What is the thing that we're supposed to be striving for? What's the page that we're all supposed to be on? And how do you get back to that? And so for me, I use it as like a grounding. And the same, Hobbes not as much, but you know, all of those kinds of writers who are theorizing about the world we're supposed to be in. I think it's helpful as someone who's sort of doing the work in practice.
Can we geek out a second to the Federalist Papers? Because I
Yeah.
do read those. I
Yeah.
read the Federalist Papers. And I highly
They're
encourage
important.
everybody to do so.
They're important.
It's the first public relations campaign in the country, right? To try to get this Constitution
Yep. Yeah.
passed. And you're right that the framers were incredibly well-read individuals, deeply
Yeah.
flawed.
Deeply flawed.
How are you so well-read and are theorizing, philosophizing about
Yeah.
this kind of government that this new nation should build, but you own slaves?
Yeah.
Like, how do those two things go together?
Yeah.
Which in many ways is a great explanation of this American experiment, right?
Yeah.
That, you know, we strive to be so much, but we have to wrestle with these really deep
Yep.
flaws.
Yep. And the humanity of it all.
And in the end,
Right. I think it's my best reminder that, you know, as much as we sort of think of the founding fathers feel like this like far away kind of thing, but they were people. And sometimes people can't look beyond their own interests, their own greed, their own what have you. And then there are also people in the room who are just like, hey, you're really screwed up, but I'm going to work on this bigger issue with you to move the ball forward, and then I'm going to fight with you on those other things, and we'll call it the Civil War.
Well, it's interesting too, right? Because it's interesting too, right? Because they read Hobbes, you know, they're studying Hobbes, or we study Hobbes, and you know, we, you know, if you're, you know, Hobbesians believe that, you know, men are deeply flawed and need to be protected from themselves. So you could see a lot of that in the way the framers constructed the Constitution and so on. Can't do this, can't do that, shouldn't do this, shouldn't do that. But my God, they were able to do a lot that they shouldn't have done.
Right. But also built on the premise, right? Like the premise of a social contract.
That's right.
And the idea that like we're all choosing to be in this community together. And what is the community that we are trying to build? And I think that's what I say this to my colleagues when we're in conference and we're wrestling about policy. I say all the time, like, we get to make the rules. We get to decide what's going to happen. And so all we have to do is decide what we want it to be and then sort of chart our path forward.
Now, let's start there, because you decided to run for office at some point.
I did.
Tell us about that. What's that like? Or did somebody say, you got to do this, and you begrudgingly said, yeah, I'll do it? Or was this something where you felt called to run?
I always tell people that I wish there was this like watershed moment, dramatic story, because a lot of people have pretty cool ones. Like, my representative voted this way, or he said this thing to me, and what have you. And it didn't happen that way for me. It really was just a matter of like a slow drip. And I think anyone who's an activist at some point will continuously run into the fact that the brick wall in front of you sometimes is just policy. And sometimes it's whatever it looks like, whether it's execution of the policy, how the policy is written, where it's applied, the brick wall that you run into is policy. And if you don't have advocacy at that level, there's just going to be an end of the road. And that was a frustration that I kept seeing and running into. And deep respect for Congressman Serrano, and 99.9% of the time we were on the same page. But I think he is more than 40 years older than I am. He was at a different point in his career than I was. And so there were moments where I'm thinking, like, you have all the gravitas in the world. This is the time where you should burn the house down and say, I'm not going to let this happen until X, Y, and Z. And he just wasn't there. And I think that was just us being different people, different points in our career. And so, but if you run into that enough times where you say, I would have spoken up about that differently, I would have done this differently, I would have made that decision, you run into that thought enough, and finally you just say, I'm going to do it.
There comes a point, but particularly when you're in the public sector, there comes a point where you develop your own voice, and you don't exist to advance someone else's voice, right? And that's where you were.
Right, exactly. And I think this happens, to your point, to anyone who's working under someone else, especially an elected official, when the work happens in someone's name. I was sort of outgrowing the space that would allow me to sort of live within those confines, where I had to be mindful of the things that I said and how I said them and how I did them, because they would have impact on someone else's career. I was ready to accept the impact on my own career.
A lot of folks don't understand that too, because when you work for someone, and in the public sector, you do some incredible work that you will never or almost ever get credit for.
Yes, 100%.
There are so many things around New York City right now that I did that my boss got credit for, which is fine, because that's the job.
Yes,
but,
yes.
at least we can go back by ourselves and look and say,
I love that thing.
I did
I love that
I
thing.
did
Yeah.
that thing.
But I think it works out because you didn't do it to say like, hey, I made a great job. And so there are so many projects that I go to and I'm just like, wow, I feel amazing about this thing. And that's really special, I think, so.
And so your first race was for what?
So
it wasn't Congress.
It was not
Right,
Congress,
right.
no. I had waded into the waters in 2016 for a council race and then got bounced from the ballot, which was, I found out on the day that like Cam Newton blew that big Super Bowl. And I was like, Cam Newton and I are having the same day, except he gets a lot more money to feel this way, and I don't, right? But my first sort of real foray into it all was in 2018. I decided to run for assembly, both times kind of in my home district. And I decided to run against someone who'd been in office almost as long as I had been alive at that point, which was going into the gauntlet, but like in a major way. And I lost that race, and it was devastating, but we made it.
You made it.
I skipped past a lot there. We
No,
can
no,
dig in
that's
if you
fine.
need to.
So you're up in Albany. I have a list of your committees. Maybe you know them by heart. You do.
Yes, of course. I'm on.
Of course you do. You're
I'm
right.
on.
Of course you
I'm on education. I'm on banks, agriculture, environmental conservation, and veterans. Did I say veterans twice? No. No. Okay.
you're good to
Perfect.
go.
Great.
You're good to go. Also, a member of the Black, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, and
The
Asian
task force, yep.
Legislative Caucus, Legislative Women's Caucus, and you did some work with the Legal Aid Society before.
I did.
Talk about that. Does that connect in many ways to the work you do in this caucus?
So I did that when I was in college, actually. That was one of my internships when I was down in Nashville. Vanderbilt's a fantastic place. Love everything about it. It's also very much a bubble. And because I'd been so involved in community at home, I was kind of craving being out in the real world when I was in college. And so I reached out to Legal Aid and was like, hey, do you guys need any help? And they were like, of course. They didn't have anyone on staff who spoke Spanish at the time. And they had a really fast growing Mexican population and they just couldn't figure it out. So I ended up being really like a glorified translator, which wasn't my best internship experience, but it was important. Oddly enough, my best internship experience, after the congressman, of course, happened the next semester. I interned with Metro Public Defenders.
Okay.
And they're just like every other public defender office in that they're so under-resourced, and gave me a ton of responsibility as a sophomore. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. You want me to go look at tapes? You want me to talk to the great, sounds good. So it was really fun.
Now, as elected official, you're going up to Albany. We have a newish governor.
Yeah.
What are some of the key pieces of legislation that you're focused on, or have been focused on, and what are you looking towards in this next session starting in January?
So right now, I think what's top of mind for me, I'd love the governor to sign a bill that we passed. Because if it doesn't, if she doesn't sign it, then it didn't happen, basically, and we'll have to start over. And this bill in particular is important to me because it represents the first time ever that the state has taken action, and it was pretty hard to pass for this reason, that the state has taken any action on setting environmental standards before the federal government does. And to me, I can't believe that that hasn't happened before, but historically, the state always kind of waits for the federal government to lead. With the understanding that sort of things of environment, things of climate are national issues, and they absolutely are. But when you're talking about air quality, it's near and dear to my heart. Again, we have the highest asthma rate in the nation in Hunts Point. The number one reason kids miss school in Hunts Point is asthma attacks. The number one reason, like of all the things you can miss school for, it's asthma attacks, which is so, like, that's avoidable. We can change that.
Right.
And so we worked really hard to get that bill changed. And, it lists out a few contaminants, et cetera, but it's really the premise that we're setting the precedent that the state has the right, the ability, the power, and the responsibility to act first as it relates to issues of health, issues of air quality, et cetera. So that's really top of mind for me right now. And I think going into the next session, thinking about this, clean revolution, this green revolution that we're going through in New York, making sure that communities that have historically been at, frontline communities in terms of the impact, are really at the front of the line when it comes to the benefits of it all. And so making sure that these just transitions are in fact just and include communities like ours.
I have a question, not so much on the work, but not so much on the policy, but on the actual, what's it like working in a legislative body? Because there are a lot of minds you need to convince to come your way if you want to get legislation passed.
Sure. It's absolutely chaotic.
Okay.
But in the best way. I think that there are a few things. I mean, there are a lot of people that you have to work with. There's a lot of personalities to manage. But that's 100% informed by where you're standing as well, right? So I'm the youngest woman in the chamber. I'm of color. And I know that those sort of inform, and I took out someone who was a colleague to my colleagues for almost 30 years. And so I know that all of those things inform kind of people's perception when I get to the place, right? And so with all of that in mind, one of the things that I think about is like, when I first joined is like, how do you establish yourself as someone who's serious, as someone who can be taken seriously, can be respected, isn't this kind of brand of new age elected that I think some people sort of casually dismiss as like only popular on Twitter or only popular on Instagram, right? But I also want to make sure that my things are getting out on Instagram and Twitter, right? So that people are hearing about them and sort of striking that balance. But I recently gave a new colleague who's coming in now the advice that like one of the things that you realize, I think, when you get there is that you're thinking about all those things way more than everyone else is. Everyone is really thinking about themselves and their own work. And they'll ask you in passing, like, who did you replace? And like, okay, great. And you kind of just move on. And then you get to the work of it all. And the more quickly you focus on that, I think the better you are.
What I didn't ask you is, so what neighborhoods do you represent? You're South Bronx.
Yes. I tell people all of your favorite parts in the Bronx are in my district. I've got Hunts Point, I've got Port Morris, I've got Mott Haven. We've got a part of Highbridge, we've got Yankee Stadium, part of the Concourse, a little part of Melrose, just all the fun in the Bronx is in our district, and I'm really proud of that. So come on over.
Does anybody have any questions? Yes?
After the overturn of Roe v. Wade, I know there's a bill right now in the Assembly for pharmacists to have the ability to prescribe birth control to patients and create like a one-stop shop. Can you describe the hurdles that bill is facing right now?
Sure. So to that bill specifically, I'd have to look into more, but I think the larger conversation around reproductive rights, I think, to be honest with you, the hurdles are really connected to the politics internally. And I say that to sort of folks who are activists often. It matters who carries your bill way more than people think. And not just because of how hard that person might work or might not work, but really because of their dynamics in the chamber. There are some people who are taken more seriously than others. There are people who are regarded as experts in a field that people would defer to more. So there was a reproductive rights package that we passed, and whether your bill got in that package or not might have had something to do with all of those things. But then also I will say it's a volume thing. There's thousands of bills that get introduced. And sometimes there's one or two details that makes this one different from the other. And I think you'll have to interview the speaker to get a sense of how they decide this one or that one. But I know that those are some of the factors that go into it. Sorry I couldn't give you more clarity on that one.
But actually, to the point, how hard is it to get a bill passed?
Yeah, it's not
hard.
easy.
Right,
It's not easy.
'Cause
And
we want things to happen, or at least
Yeah.
there's an expectation that you can just get something done, and it's not that easy, and it's certainly not quick. Yes, Cynthia?
I've been recently sort of introduced to how lobbying works in the city in terms of city council members and such.
Yeah.
I mean, it's often, I guess, not always a bad thing in certain
Yeah.
cases, but I just sort of wanted to know how much your relationship to lobbying, how does that go if they come into your office, and how much of their lobbying does impact your decision on policy?
yeah, that's a really great question. I am venturing to say that I have never met, yeah, I'm pretty sure I've never only met with a lobbyist. Lobbyists, I think, do get a bad rep sometimes, but they're always representing a client. And so anytime there's a lobbyist in my office, I'm also meeting with their client. And there are many nonprofits that are rep by lobbyists. We need people who are bona fide experts saying, hey, here's this, and that you should look out for. Here's the best path. And so we do rely on activists, on lobbyists, on folks who are entrenched in the issue to really present information to us.
I think this is an important point to raise too, because sometimes we have an impression of elected officials that kind of walk their community, I know you do, and just say, okay, I gotta fix that, I gotta fix that, I gotta fix that. But there's also a significant component where people are coming to you with problems that you may or may not know exist already.
Yes, 100%. And that happens all the time, to be honest, when you're talking about policy, especially because it is a big world full of sort of entangled regulations and laws, and there's a lot of unintended consequences too, and a lot of unintended effects that you want to fix for people. So yes, and it's important, and we count on people to do that.
And they don't always come to you with the solution fully formed either. Do they expect you to have it?
100%, but it's really nice when people have spent time thinking about it and are like, hey, we've come up with an idea. Though, it depends, right? Because if Chevron says we've come up with the solution for climate change, I'm going to be a little skeptical, right? But you kind of take everything with a grain of salt. But we do work hard to be creative and understand that. I think the most important thing to understand actually is that there are many great solutions out in these communities, especially communities like the South Bronx, where people have been forced to innovate for so long just because they're having to do so much with so little. What's not been happening is that our communities have been locked out of these halls of power. And so it's really about digging deep into communities and into places where you haven't looked before for solutions and bringing that into the assembly with you.
Okay. You had a thought as well. Again.
Yeah, I feel like a hot button
What's up?
question.
Let's do it.
Okay, so the mayor's recent attempt to implement a public health paradigm, but forcibly removing mentally ill people off the streets. What are your thoughts on that?
Good question. So this idea, something like it, came up during our budget process in this last year, and myself and others pushed back on it because the condition that we gave, it was fine, we'll do it if you can guarantee that that night folks are going to have a psych bed to go into. And because that guarantee isn't there, that's where I think it's problematic. If we could say that we were going to instantly make sure that every single one of those people, that you would never make a stop in Rikers, if you would never make a stop in some place that you are going to disappear and maybe we'll never see you again, or you'll get lost in the system, then more open to it. But because that hasn't been spelled out, I do think it's deeply problematic. Good question though.
Yes.
Do you see it being a problem because of the medical insurance and the other way around because that's accessibility isn't there?
I really just see it a problem with the concept of what is the care plan for this person. If you were saying that someone is in a mental state where they're unable to care for themselves, then you have to be offering a care plan and a care continuum that is going to take care of them. And if you look at how DHS is functioning right now, I don't have faith that those people are going to be well taken care of. And that's just one part of this very long continuum. And so what gives me pause is anytime you're involuntarily committing folks to any form of imprisonment, you're really playing a dangerous game in terms of people's actual freedom being on the line. And I do worry that homelessness overall, especially folks who are sort of street homeless, it's been an issue that the city and the state has just historically wanted out of sight. Not necessarily so interested in solving the root problems, but really making it so that people don't have to look at it every day. And I worry that this makes it easier to just do that.
You had some pretty good internships, and you started young in your teens, sort of going out there. What's your advice for young people broadly, students in this room, in terms of getting internships or that first job?
Yeah, good question. I think go for your dream spot. the place that you want to be is the place that you should reach out to. I think one of the things that we all sort of fall into sometimes is like going for that thing that feels like attainable for you, but it's all attainable. All these places are as accessible as you try to make them for yourself. And that's not to say that you'll land every role, but it certainly means that you shouldn't cut yourself off from it. Every single government office, every single nonprofit on this planet needs more help than they have, is under-resourced when it comes to staff. And so they're going to appreciate help of someone who's saying, hey, I'd love to just figure out how to be helpful to you all. And I'd also say be open-minded. I think there was a time where I thought I wanted to do this kind of work in the office, but really I just was happy to be there and would do anything, and that's kind of how my career has grown into what it has. And so keep an open mind and go for it. Pick up the phone, call, ask the question, because they'll appreciate it.
We talked about using voice. How scary was that the first time to kind of step out and say, I'm going to speak for myself now? And what would be your advice to any person, young or old, that is sort of making that transition now, if you will?
I give this advice regularly. It is always going to be scary. And I think that's something really important to remember, because as much as it sounds like a cliche, like you're never going to feel ready, I still don't feel ready all the time, right? And so, and it never gets easier. I'm still sort of taking risks that could cost me politically. And I think about like, oh, is this the cliff I'm going to go off? And then you just go because you're in this work to do it. And so I think remember that anxiety is normal, it's natural, and it might always be there. But that's because you're on the cusp of doing work that's consequential, that's difficult, that's challenging. And it would be almost strange if that didn't make you a little nervous, right? And so remember that that's just part of being human, and that's a very normal thing to feel, and I hope that you push through that anyway. If there are other things that are keeping you from going after the opportunity, from doing the thing, fine. But don't let it be the nervousness, and say, maybe in 2 years I'll be less nervous, because you won't. And it'll always be difficult. And so lean in.
If you can think about it, if you can remember sort of I want to say worst day, but just a day that just, brought you down a bit, that was really difficult for you, either on a campaign or while in office.
Yeah. This day actually made it to the news.
Wow.
So last year in the budget cycle, we'd had a really tense budget cycle. One of the most contentious points was the excluded worker fund, which was first in the nation. We ultimately passed it. I'm super proud of it. But it was to give folks who are undocumented or outside of status access to unemployment funds that they technically pay into because they pay taxes, but they didn't get any of those pandemic sort of stimulus dollars, nothing like that, because they are sort of not on the books, right? And so we thought that wasn't fair in New York State. They didn't get any help. This is a group of people that didn't get any help, no unemployment, nothing. And we just know that we were all living through what we were living through. And so there was a lot of people in my colleagues who were excited about pushing for this opportunity. And then there were folks who were less excited. And we had to sort of grapple with that as a conference. As Democrats, we had to, you kind of fight it out behind closed doors. One of my colleagues was having a really tough time in that some of my other colleagues, they got into some stuff on Twitter. Somebody called somebody a racist. One of my other colleagues liked the tweet. He noticed, and it was just this whole thing. And I'd asked for this concept of collegiality is something that we hear about in our chamber. We're colleagues, let's be kind. And I said, as a new member, I'm not feeling that all the time. I feel like we are not as nice to each other as everyone says we're supposed to be, and I would just appreciate it if we could be kinder. And then a couple of moments later, that gentleman who was upset was just like, to my new colleagues, I shouldn't even call you colleagues because you're not even my colleagues. And I made a face, and I was like, it's almost as if I hadn't just said what I said. I was like, am I in the Twilight Zone? Did I speak? I can't. Am I having a stroke? And so he called me a smartass. He told me to put my hands down. You smartass. This is the first time I'm telling this story. I'm realizing right now that this is the first time I tell the story publicly. So here's nothing. I didn't comment to reporters after it. But he called me a smartass. He said, don't put your hands down. Don't be a smartass. And I can be a smartass. And so I am from Hunts Point, and I gave him the finger. and we were on a Zoom, and I shut the computer, left the conference, what have you. I was with one of my colleagues, so I could still hear what was going on in the Zoom, and I expected him to be admonished, because you can't call someone a smartass,
Yeah.
right? And so, but he wasn't. And it was like the show just kept going. And the meeting ended, and it was like, hey guys, we all need to calm down. And I was really frustrated. So I went to Twitter. And I wrote a tweet, and it was just like, don't ever call me a smartass again. I have one name, that's assembly member to you. That was a tweet heard around the world. It was in the middle of budget. It was very intense. It spawned a bunch of articles. But it was an important boundary setting exercise for me. That was my first 3 months in office, and you're not going to call me a smartass.
Boundary setting, very important.
Right? Like, if you call me a smartass, then we're going to
Yeah.
dance a little. And like, now everybody knows that, right? And so, but it was, I'll tell you, it was, and people sort of were all on my side, and it was great, but I, the next day, woke up and cried about it. And I just was just like, this is not what I came here for, right? Like, there's parts of politics that are hard and that you expect to be hard, and the work is difficult, but that's not supposed to be part of it. And I know something tells me that if I wasn't a young woman of color, this older white man would not have felt comfortable calling me a smartass. And that's the part of it that I think was really frustrating and really infuriating. So that was a hard day. We won on the issue, and I always tell people it only matters, you win on the issue and that's what counts. And people are helped, and that's what counts in the end, but that was a hard day.
Well, then let's talk about your best day. What was the proudest moment?
Oh, good question. I think my proudest moment so far was probably around pandemic protections again. So the eviction moratorium, the fact that you got 1 year kind of to stay in your house after, was not always a guarantee. And myself and some colleagues, I was just like, we need to do something. And we did a sleep out in the war room at the Capitol at the time. The Capitol was closed to the public. And so all of the activism was really kind of tampered down. And so we just decided to use our access to really blow the issue up, and we got it all the way to a year, and I feel really proud about that. Yeah, really proud about that, because at first people were just like, get rid of, let people be evicted, and that's obviously not something we wanted to let happen.
Well, I didn't know our podcast would break news like that, but thank you for telling that story. Thank you for
Sure.
your candor in talking about that
Thanks.
moment. It should be boundary setting. It's very important.
It's important, especially in politics.
Especially in politics, that's right. Assembly member, we thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
This was a great conversation. Where can we find you?
I'm Amanda Septimo on all social platforms, and I do a lot of my own social. So I tell people it's like the fastest way to get to me, and I'm sure my staff deals with too many screenshots from me. Someone sends me a message, and I'm like, hey, take care of this. Please help this person. But yeah, I'm on all my social, and I'm always happy to talk to people.
Now, you were doing your own podcast as well on Mondays? Still
Mondays
doing
with
it?
Amanda.
Yeah.
They will be back as we get to Albany, and it's really just an opportunity to kind of pull back the curtain on like what happens in Albany, what are we doing there, what are we talking about, how does the budget process work, what is the point of all this, what is this American experiment we're doing, how does it work in Albany. So yes, Mondays with Amanda will be back, and it's really, again, another place where nothing's off limits, and we invite people to ask their questions, what they're seeing in the news, what they want to learn more about, and I do my best to kind of answer. But I will say, it was tricky because I started Mondays with Amanda, and then we went into the scandal with the governor, and I was like, oh, these are harder questions.
Well, we thank you so much for all that you do for the people of New York
you.
and the Bronx, specifically my hometown.
Thank you.
So
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Thank
very
you for
much.
having me.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all.